In this video, I want to talk to you about Shalom versus Utopia. What is humanity aiming at? What are we doing? Where are we going? Stick with me. I'm going to take you through the comparison between Shalom, God's ideal for the human race, and Utopia, a godless future made by man. You know, we all know there's something wrong in the world, and I've been preaching to my church recently about Shalom and about the fact that this world is not the way it's supposed to be. Shalom, that we are at peace with God, peace with each other, peace with ourselves, peace with the creation. That is God's aim and was God's aim and plan in his initial creation in the beginning. But take God out of the picture, take the Christian worldview out of the picture, and you're still left with this understanding that we need to make things better. But the world heads towards a place called Utopia, this idea of human flourishing in a society where everything is perfect, but everything is without God. So Shalom is a Hebrew word from the Old Testament translated as peace, but the English word doesn't really do it justice. Shalom really means the flourishing of all things. So not only each individual, but each individual with themselves, as well as with one another, as well as with the creation around them, and ultimately along with God. Shalom is what God created in the Garden of Eden, that he can walk in the cool of the day with his creation. And God's heart and desire through Jesus Christ has been to restore all things back to that place of garden, and like the Garden of Eden, that heaven would be on the earth. As it says in Revelations 21, that heaven would come down to earth. The New Jerusalem comes out of heaven, and now God can dwell with man, and he will be their God and they will be his people. Utopia, on the other hand, well, it's a similar idea of human flourishing, but it's done without God, and it really requires the state or the government or someone to be in control and have the power to set things right. And it's more of a Genesis 11 idea of building a Tower of Babel. We'll build a Tower of Babel up to the heavens and make a name for ourselves. And we can do it as a human race, and our human effort. We can control things and set things right so that everyone is better off. So how do we build these places? What's the difference between Shalom and Utopia? Well, Shalom is ultimately built by God. It's not left up to mankind to build a Tower of Babel like Genesis 11. God is in control. That's why God sent his son, Jesus Christ, to deal with the curse of sin, to justify the human race and give them the opportunity to be righteous, that they could be back in good relationship with him and not separated any longer from him or from one another. It says in Acts chapter 3 verse 21, for he, and that's talking about Jesus Christ, must remain in heaven until the final restoration of all things, just as God promised long ago through his prophets. We see in the building of Shalom and the establishment of peace on earth that God's hand has been moving throughout all of history. We see men and women of God establishing hospitals and education centers, dealing with medical issues for the sake of the flourishing of all humankind. We see the democracy installed in Christian nations. We see wealth, all of these things, people working hard to alleviate suffering in order that humans can flourish and that the creation can flourish. Utopia, on the other hand, is really equality based. So you take God out of the picture, and now it's not God's moral character or God's justice that sets things right and makes moral calls. It's man and really the state and government that needs to be in control in order to set things right. The problem with this idea and this approach, however, the godless approach to Shalom, you may say, Utopia, is that the 20th century left us with the bloodiest century of all time. 60 million people plus were killed in communist Russia, in Maoist China, in Cambodia, under these regimes trying to establish Utopia on the earth, a heaven on the earth, but without a divine being called God. The problem in Utopia is not fallen man or the fall. The problem in Utopia, because there's no God, it's godless perfection that we're aiming at, is that someone has to be to blame. A man has to be to blame. So the man that's blamed is whoever the man in control decides to blame. And the problem with this is we lose our moral compass. When there's no God with his moral character telling us what is justice, what is right and wrong, and man is in control of justice and trying to build a perfect society by dealing with that which he sees as the enemy, we get into trouble. The human race has got into trouble many, many times. The idea behind utopia is often in the area of progressivism. Everything that's moving forward is seen as good. It's what Chuck Colson used to call the escalator myth. So everything that's moving upwards and everything that's moving forwards, everything that's progressive is seen as good and moving us towards utopia. Well, we know as Christians in our worldview that everything that's seen as good is what God has created and what God says is good. So we trust him that he's restoring all things to the way that they should be. And we glorify God, who is ultimately the one in heaven that brings his kingdom down here to earth. Utopia glorifies man and looks to man and man's wisdom and man's strength and man's intelligence to establish a perfect society on the earth. My challenge to you is, what are you establishing? What are you building towards? Are you getting caught in the vain ideologies of this world, trying to build perfection without God? Or are you working with the mission of God to establish the kingdom of heaven on this earth, to establish shalom? Are you establishing shalom in your own life, your own relationships? Are you establishing shalom, peace, heaven on earth, in your own home, in your own church, in your own city, in your own nation? Don't get caught up on vain thinking and idealistic ideas of this world, progressive ideas that are leading to nothingness. Get caught up on what God is doing and his mission of establishing his kingdom on the earth. There's nothing greater that you can give your life to. Thanks for watching this video. Like, subscribe, comment down below. I'll also link to you my full sermon that I spoke about shalom, maybe even my 2 sermons that I spoke about shalom. And thank you to the 300 who are always committed to liking, sharing, commenting on every video and post that I put up. I appreciate your work. Let's get the message out.